you might be looking at this deal and just thinking, wow, this deal is terrible and I'm just going to forget about it and go on to the next lead. That would be what most people would do if they were unaware of the exit strategy that could make this deal very profitable. In fact, so profitable that it could net you $100,000 without doing anything to the property. All right, well, welcome back to the Subto Investor Show. My name is Hans, and this is part 4 of Deal 1 in my Real Subto Deal Breakdown video series, where I am walking through deals from beginning to end, actual subject to deals that I've closed. Now we've closed over 24 of them and have sold or will sell with seller financing and lease options more than 30 of these, and hopefully there's a nugget for you here. In this episode, I am going to be breaking down the numbers on this subject to deal, which I am passionate about. At least I'm very excited about them, because when I look at them, it makes me want to go do more subject to deals. Let's stop beating around the bush and get right to it. Here is a spreadsheet of what this subject to deal looks like, guys. This was my first subject to deal, and so these numbers are not grand slam numbers by any stretch of the imagination. We will get to those, but on this deal, it was just a kind of decent subject to deal. I would take this deal any day of the week for sure. Let me just show you here what we got going on. So on the acquisition side of the numbers, and this yellow column right here, we closed July 27th, 2021 on this property, and the purchase price, if you recall from previous episodes, was $122,000 roughly. I'm going to use round numbers, and this purchase price is comprised of 3 different loans which we took subject to. The first mortgage of $97,000, the second mortgage of $11,000, and a construction lien of $13,000, all combined together to be $122,000 purchase price. And the interest rate on the loan, which we took subject to, was 3.625%, one of those fantastic interest rates that they were just handing out left and right during that COVID era. Oh man, that COVID era, how we do not miss you whatsoever. The monthly payment on that first mortgage was and is $844,000. So that's our Subto mortgage payment. Now, we gave $0 to the seller at closing, which sometimes we do actually give cash to the seller at closing. Now, the closing costs, we did end up writing a check for a grand total of $948 and some change for closing. Now, the rest of the details are irrelevant for our purposes. Those are the basic numbers of the deal. But now, how do you think about these numbers? If you were to come across this deal and it was presented to you, how would you think about these numbers? Now, I'll tell you how I thought about them. So first of all, with a purchase price of $122,000, she couldn't sell the thing on the market for, I think she had it listed at maybe $127,000. And so she had gotten under contract twice, but contracts fell through. This obviously wouldn't work as a fix and flip, right? So if this deal came across your desk and it couldn't sell on the market for about her payoff amount, then you're not going to fix and flip. There wasn't really much value to add since the house was in really good shape. It really didn't need anything besides a good deep clean. So not good fix and flip, and not a good wholesale, obviously, because you wouldn't be able to get it underneath of all of the loan payments, right? You'd have to offer her above $122,000, and then there's no room for a wholesale fee. What about for a rental property? Well, so your monthly payment is $844. Now, at the time, the rents for this kind of house would have been $1,000, maybe $1,050. You might stretch it to $1,100 if you got lucky. And so you'd be looking at a grand total gross cash flow, maybe $200, $250 as a rental property. That's not very good when you have to factor into the numbers capital expenditures, if you have to replace like the HVAC system or the roof or a sub pump or whatever, and then repairs, just little tiny things, make readies for when there's vacancies and turnover, property managements. Gosh, guys, as a rental property, these numbers do not work. You know, the 50% rule, that 50% of your rents are going to go towards expenses, and then debt service after that. Like, there's no cash flow here. You might be looking at this deal and just thinking, wow, this deal is terrible, and I'm just going to forget about it and go on to the next lead. That would be what most people would do if they were unaware of the exit strategy that could make this deal very profitable. In fact, so profitable that it could net you $100,000 without doing anything to the property. So we were when we were learning creative finance at the time, we had in mind that we might need to do something like a lease and option or seller finance on a contract for deed in order to make these kinds of numbers profitable for us. And if you don't have the right exit strategy in place, if you don't know what to do with a subject to deal that's low equity and the mortgage payment's kind of high, then you won't be able to make this deal profitable. And so we we marketed it for rent and on a rent to own, and eventually we settled on a land contract. We found a couple who could not qualify for a mortgage, and so seller financing was the perfect solution for them. We gave them basically a contract for deed with the following terms. We sold it for $132,000. The difference in our sales price of the house with our total mortgage balance is roughly $11,000. So we created $11,000 like that. We created equity out of thin air, really out of the value add of the seller financing that we were providing. And so that's pretty awesome, just to make equity just magically like that. This property needed 0 repairs, so our rehab budget was 0. There you go. We collected a $5,000 down payment from our buyers. This is on the low side of down payments and option fees which we receive. Usually when you do an option fee, you're looking at 3 to 5% roughly. And then if you're looking at doing seller financing, we like to get 8 to 10%, possibly more. We collected $5,000. Now, what that meant for us in the grand scheme of things was, again, we had only put $948 into this deal in closing costs, but then we got $5,000 on a down payment. So we made net $4,000 after all was said and done. And look at how long it took us to place a buyer. It only took us about 2 weeks to place a buyer. It felt like an eternity that we were marketing this thing, but it actually was a very short period of time, and so our holding costs were essentially 0. Now, they ended up owing $127.5 after their $5,000 payment, and so what the back end spread looks like for us, in other words, what we owe on our mortgages subject to, and then what our buyers owe, that's how the back end spread is calculated. So if we jump over here to the amortization schedule, this is how you determine the profit on these subject to deals. We have our amortization schedule. This is the Subto amortization schedule. And then we have the buyer's amortization schedule right here. So after, let's say, 12 months, you can see that we would owe $95,000 and some change on our Subto mortgage. Our buyer would owe $126,000, and so the difference in that back-end spread is $19,000. We're taking into account this partial claim that we'd have to pay, that, and then actually not included in this green column here. It should be, but this is kind of a complicated first subject to deal. I apologize. Is that we would have to subtract that construction loan from this $19,000, which would be, I think, roughly about $12,000. So you would actually, that's how we get to, let me come down here real quick. After the end of year 1, in our profit analysis, if our buyer were to sell the house or refinance and cash us out on the seller financing contract for deed, our back end spread would be about $6,472. Now, combined with the cash flow from the monthly payments, that would be a total profit of $22,000. Actually, this bottom column is incorrect. I am so sorry about that. Add these two numbers and that's what the total profit would be. So roughly $10,000. So that's if our buyers were to sell the property or refinance the property after just 1 year. We would have only made $10,000 on the deal. But then take a look. After 5 years, I'm kind of jumping the gun here. Let me back up real quick. So I talked about how we sold this on a contract for deed. The construction loan is being paid via property taxes. Don't worry about that for now. We charged an interest rate of 8.53 for a non-qualifying loan, which is actually somewhat generous. A lot of seller financing will charge in the 9% range. So anyways, our cash flow spread is really the difference between the interest rate that we took subject to, the 3.625 interest rate, and then the interest rate that we are getting on seller financing. That's how the cash flow is calculated, because the taxes and the insurance just kind of pass through since our buyer pays them. We ended up getting $1,200 a month in monthly payments, and so our cash flow is just the difference between our contract for deed monthly payment and the Subto mortgage that we have to pay. And so that number is $355, which doesn't ever change. Our cash flow is locked in at $355. And so the wonderful thing about subject to and then doing these wrap seller finance deals is that the cash flow is reliable. You are essentially becoming a note holder, and you're not having to do repairs, property management, property maintenance, capital expenditures, and you just collect the payments and service the contract for deed, kind of like a lender would have a note serviced on their behalf. What I was trying to get to here was, after 5 years of this deal, we'll have made in just cash flow numbers, that is monthly payments that we collect, our cash flow would be just north of $21,000, and the back end spread would be about $13,000, just north of that. And so if our seller were to sell or refinance at the end of 5 years, our total profit would be what? Let's add those two numbers. $34,600. After 10 years, you can see what the numbers would be. And let's go to after 25 years. After 25 years, if our buyer lived in that property for 25 years, we'll have made $106,000 on just cash flow. And then if they were to sell, there'd be almost a $20,000 back end payoff for us. So then our total profit would have been, gosh, I was underestimating the profit. I was saying $100,000. It could be as high as almost $127,000 if this deal went to its full conclusion. The awesome part about it that I love is that I don't have to be a property manager. I don't have to hire crappy property management. I don't have to deal with crappy contractors. I don't have to deal with tenant turnover, with make-readies, with capital expenditures, tax increases. None of that stuff bothers me because I am just the lender here. This model is fantastic for establishing rapid cash flow. So, one other incredible thing about this deal is the cash-on-cash return calculation. Well, it doesn't really get any better when you are doing creative financing. Let's just take a look at the numbers and let them speak for themselves. Let's see. So after the first year, remember, in our profit analysis, we had, let's bust out the calculator here. If we take the $4,270 of cash flow that we made that first year and divide it by our all-in cost, let's just call them $1,000, our closing costs plus some utility payments that we had. So $4,270, our total cash flow for the first year. divided by our all-in cost of $1,000 gives us a cash-on-cash return of 427%. So then after 5 years, just take our cash flow, $21,354 divided by $1,000, again, our all-in cost. We are at a 2,100% cash-on-cash return. This gets just really stupid and ridiculous, but let's just take that year 30 cash-on-cash return. We'll take $128,000, divide that by $1,000, and I don't know if I'll be able to do this math. It's going to be I think that's 12,812% cash-on-cash return. Guys, what's funny, I mean, I guess technically since we made some money on the down payment from our contract for deed buyer, we're at an infinite cash-on-cash return. So those are the numbers on the subject to deal. What would you have thought? Let me know in the comments if you were to come across a deal with those kinds of numbers. Would you have identified it immediately as a slam dunk subject to deal, or would you have passed it by as, oh, this deal would never cash flow, there's no equity to flip this thing or wholesale this thing? What would you have done with this property, and would you have identified this as a very solid investment opportunity from the get-go? If you have any questions about this particular subject to deal that I have not answered, then please let me know in the comments below, and I will be happy to answer those questions for you. Until next time, stay creative. Peace.